Hey everybody, welcome to Voices of Verse Therapy Episode 2. I'm Adam, founder of Verse, and today we're excited to have Stephanie Feero with us. Stephanie is a certified SLP with over 7 years of experience across all these different settings, including outpatient clinics, skilled nursing facilities, and private practice. She's also the creator of Chomper Champs, which is an innovative therapy tool designed to make speech therapy engaging and effective for pediatrics specifically. Lastly, she's our clinical director at Verse. So super, super special guest for us. And today she's going to be doing a deep dive on a topic that's near and dear to her, something that she's done a ton of work on in her own practice, which is reading readiness. And she'll also share a little bit about her business, Chomper Champs, and how they're making a difference in speech pathology. So welcome, Stephanie. Steph, could you start by sharing a little bit about your background and what led you to specialize in speech language pathology?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So I graduated from West Texas A&M in 2017 with my master's as an SLP. And since then, like you said, I've worked in a variety of settings, and it's been kind of fun to spend my career hopping around a little bit to really see what I'm passionate about. And that turns out to be a lot of pediatrics, specifically literacy intervention, is where I have been the most clinically interested. I initially wanted to become an SLP because I took sign language as my foreign language in my early college classes. And I didn't even really know what speech pathology was. And I thought, maybe I want to be a sign language interpreter. And from that, research connected to what speech language pathology is, and have been super satisfied in my career. I've had wonderful employers and, my own, with Chomper Champs, my own business. So it's been a really good career for me.
Awesome. And then you have this, it's weird because in the field, it almost feels a little bit niche, even though it's this huge area, which is reading readiness and literacy. So I'd love to just hear what sparked your interest in that.
Yeah, totally. SLPs aren't traditionally trained in literacy intervention. Very few graduate programs, do a deep dive into it. Almost nobody I know has an actual class, but it is well within the scope of practice of an SLP to target reading and literacy intervention and specifically all the fundamental skills that build up to being able to be a proficient reader. I mean, SLPs are just like built for this. The problem is that a lot of them don't have connections to the appropriate tools or programs that they can use to implement the skills that they already clinically possess just from being a speech language pathologist. I was always really interested in reading. I'm a reader, but again, I fell into that category as well of just never really understanding like how to get started. I would have these kids come to me with parents reporting reading difficulties, and I would just say, I think that the school needs to target that, which unfortunately, like, hindsight is always 20/20. Knowing now what I know now, it's like that's probably one of the least recommended places I would recommend them getting quality intervention for reading. So I really dove into it at the beginning of COVID. So many of these kids were falling behind, obviously, from just like being at home. And then as an SLP, children with speech and language delays are at higher risk for reading delays in the future. So the types of children we see are just like, I believe that we should be integrating literacy into every intervention for a pediatric patient with speech and language delays. So I started just kind of like figuring out, I did some inconsistent CEUs on speechpathology.com. Reading Rockets is an organization and they got grant funding and they just published a reading module CEU course that I recommend every SLP take. And then I got a program. I use the All About Spelling program as kind of a guide to target the early phonological intervention kind of hierarchy. And with all of these like random tools together, I just like found this love for literacy and started seeing these crazy results for these kids where they'd been getting reading help in the schools for, 2 years. And then in my room, we make years of progress within 6 months of structured literacy intervention. So that's been really motivating and, further incites my passion for literacy as an SLP.
Okay, let's go a little bit deeper on that. So where do you think it is that the school is falling short, or why do you think that speech is so well positioned to do really well with reading readiness?
Yeah, so Unfortunately, I'm a big supporter of the public schools, but unfortunately, I think it's a systemic issue where they just don't have enough qualified reading interventionists. It was not uncommon in the clinic where I would have a 6th grader come to my room in the outpatient clinic, and they'd be in 6th grade at a 2nd grade reading level. Yet parent reported that they had been pulled out, twice a week for reading help for their entire elementary education. And by deep diving, this isn't the case for everybody, but a lot of the time what was happening for reading help is the child would get pulled out, put in the resource room with a para-educator who just simply doesn't have the training and qualifications to effectively not even teach, but the difference between teaching reading and reading intervention. Like, you need an interventionist, like a speech language pathologist or qualified reading interventionist. So that's what I saw a lot. And the schools oftentimes don't have a reading interventionist, and then they really narrow what SLPs can target in the school as well. And then I won't even get into the incredibly high caseloads that SLPs have in the school. A lot of the time they don't have the capacity to take on reading kids as well. So it's just kind of tricky. And I think that anytime you have a child who you're concerned about their reading skills, you should seek outside support outside the schools. Just get a second opinion, get somebody who can focus one-on-one with your child and really tailor it to what your concerns are, like we can at Verse. Did that answer your question? That was long-winded. I could talk for hours about this.
No, totally. I think it's like a lot of things across education, healthcare, where it really just comes down to a staffing issue. And if you have the access to something that's specialized to your kiddo, it's just going to be tremendously helpful. So we talked a little bit about, when should you seek that outside help? From your perspective, what are the key components that indicate a child is ready to start reading?
Yeah, so reading readiness is complex because so we think about reading and we're like, oh yeah, a kid comes out and they grow and they see words and we teach them the sounds the letters make and then they can start reading. But really, there's no reading part of the brain. Reading relies on visual processing, language, problem solving, all of these orthographic mapping skills. So when somebody reads or decodes a word, your brain is bouncing all over the place. And compare that to language. Humans have a language center in the brain. You have a child, and the child naturally is going to develop language outside the presence of some sort of, delay or disorder or neurological difference. So I think that when we think about reading readiness, it's not just looking at the word and starting to sound it out. There are all of these skills that come before a child is actually ready to decode. And those skills are called phonological awareness and phonemic awareness skills. And so based on the child's age and developmental norms for the skills, I think it's never too early to start targeting them. But things like, can a child hear the word cat and tell you what sound is at the beginning of that word? Or if I say the word cat, but I add a sound at the end, what does that word become? And can a child phonologically process that our sounds in words and the letters, they don't really mean anything. They're just a symbol for a sound, and those sounds are dynamic and we can move them around. And when we move them around, they hold meaning and they change the meaning of the word. And all of those phonological skills are kind of the foundation for fluent reading and early reading too. So my recommendation for determining if your child is ready to start reading, 1, read with them all the time. Expose them to as many words as possible before their 4th birthday. Research tells us that the more words a child is exposed to before their 4th birthday, the higher their IQ later, the more proficient reading, and then following them lifetime. Early language exposure is critical for long-term abilities. So read to your children all the time. Talk to them nonstop. It sounds really crazy, but even just narrating oh, mommy is walking to the car. Mommy is buckling the seatbelt. The seatbelt goes click, click, nonstop. And what that does is it builds this huge vocabulary for children. So when they're reading a text and they come across a word that maybe they don't have the phonological skills to decode it yet, they're like, oh, well, I know the first sound in that word and I know this sound and we were just talking about the car. So that word must be seat because I've heard mommy say it 5 trillion times. So it's all so interconnected. And knowing specifically when your child is ready to read varies so much based on those types of skills too.
So speaking of the interconnectivity, you obviously have this broad range of experience and tons of different communication disorders, even outside of reading readiness. I'm curious if you see these things affect each other. So for example, do you see specific challenges with kids that have different communication disorders and things that they might face when developing their reading skills?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of children who have a speech sound delay or disorder, many times it's a phonological disorder, which means that their mouth can make the sound. It's just that their brain is not understanding that that's the correct sound to make. So when I see children with phonological disorders, I'm always worried about reading. And you can diagnose a phonological disorder really as young as 3 years old. So when I have those 3-year-olds come in who the main concern is speech sound development, that's why I think it's so important to always be incorporating literacy, not just teaching them the k sound, but showing them what a k is, talking about the k in the beginning, the middle, and the ends of words, doing a lot of visual representation even though I don't expect a 3-year-old to be able to read the word cat, we can do so many fun games that are building those phonological skills so that when the time comes that they should be able to see and tell you what sound it is when they're 5 years old, they've been primed for years despite their speech sound disorder.
And when you're creating a plan for a kid, do you just have this broad plan that you kind of give to all these different kiddos and you just say, let's get better at everything? Or what does that look like? Do you make sure to allocate specific time to specific disorders depending on how they test? I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, sessions. You can target so many goals in one session. So if the main concern is the speech sound disorder, it's the difference between the goals I have and then the approach I'm taking. So, a child has speech delay and they come in, you can take an articulation approach. You can take that phonological approach. You can take a literacy approach. And that's where the tools and resources you have at your disposal really come in to influence the type of approach that you're going to take or can take. The school SLPs can be really limited in their resources and materials they have access to. So I will target, I want to be incorporating that literacy through everything, even if I don't have a specific goal for it. I'm using that as my approach to intervention.
Nice. Yeah, and I think a huge part of the shortage in resources in schools are what we hear about, but also you just have one person who's getting pulled into so many different directions and they only have so many tools for so many people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they have to be able to see the entire class load. So I'd love to hear a bit about your business moving on from Reading Readiness. One of the coolest things about having Stephanie on our team is she's a founder herself. So you've created Chomper Champs, which is a 3D printed therapy tool. I would love to just hear more about that, put a spotlight on that, and learn about how your experiences in speech therapy influence the tool's development.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for letting me talk about it. I love it. So I had this idea for Chomper Champs when I was working in a pretty busy clinic and I was starting to see pediatric feeding clients. And pediatric feeding clients don't want to eat themselves. That's the whole reason they're there is they have a really limited diet. They're oftentimes have a lot of trauma associated around food. And so we would pretend to feed puppets, or a lot of SLPs will print out a face and then cut out the mouth and prop the paper up against a paper bag or something and you can feed it. Feeding theme is always a hit in the speech room, but I was how come nothing exists that's actually something you can really feed? And it works, on cause and effect. So some of my younger ones, they would put the food in there and then they would be where'd it go? So it was kind of fun. My initial prototype was actually terrifying compared to like my design I have now. I feel bad for the kids I used it with because it was rough. But I just had this idea for this product specifically for the feeding therapy I was doing. And then I made it and I started using it like all the time for speech and language and literacy and feeding. And I mean, I use my Chomper Champ all day, every day. And so something that just started as kind of like a hobby eventually turned into a business, and other SLPs buy them. And it's just kind of grown and evolved from there. And now I'm doing these themed therapy kits. So if you have a Chomper Champ, you can buy the kits to dress him up. He has 3D printed accessories that I designed for him. And the kits also come with digital download resources and things to feed him. So it's just kind of evolved. And I think going back to SLPs, there's no caseload cap for an SLP a lot of times. And because reimbursement rates are so poor in a lot of areas, that you have to see so many kids in a day to financially make a clinic work. So having these SLPs who have kids all day back to back for 30-minute sessions, you know, I've been inspired to create resources that are grab and go. I say low prep, easy cleanup. You can use it for almost any goal.
I still think you're underselling yourself a little bit on two things. One, the first draft. So I've seen your reels and I've seen what the first draft of this looked like, and it was still very impressive. I would have played with it when I was a kiddo. I think it was pretty sweet. They also look awesome now. Clearly a lot of progress, but like they started off pretty great. The other part is you're kind of underselling like the engineering and design side of this. You did all of the modeling, all the CAD, and what's really cool about, oh really? You worked with somebody?
I had to hire somebody to do. So I do basic design myself. I'll design some of the accessories, but yeah, that was something that was out of my wheelhouse. And so I do have a designer who I paid to help me with the 3D modeling, but I did teach myself how to 3D print, and that was wild. And now 3D printers have come so far in the last 5 years that I actually help other people get started with 3D printing, whether it's for their business or hobby. And the 3D printers now are so easy. I'm almost like resentful of the people who are learning to 3D print now because it was not that easy 5 years ago.
Well, I mean, you taught yourself how to be really technical to get these things out, which is awesome, even if you weren't in the nitty gritty of the CAD part. The other thing that I just think is so cool about it is I don't know if it was intentional, but you made like the supply chain part of this so much more simple than it could have been. Like you could have outsourced and you could have like manufactured in all these different places. You could have been using like multiple vendors, and you just found a way to kind of be able to 3D print these things in your house and ship them off. I just think it's like such an efficient, cool way to kind of do your business. So I want to give you some flowers there.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, well, one of the biggest, I would ideally have loved to manufacture it, but the cost was just so expensive. And I think that what's really cool, like learning about this 3D printing and developing Chomper Champs, is SLPs are so creative. They're known for their creativity, and all of these SLP creators I've connected with, on Instagram, and Teachers Pay Teachers, who are making these really cool things. A lot of them digital, some of them physical products. Like SLPs are so creative, and 3D printing is so accessible and easy that I've had SLPs connect with me and say, hey, I have this idea for this game, or I have this idea for this product. And I'm like, girl, if I can do it, anybody can. Especially now with 3D printing technology, just the last 12 months advancing so much. So I think that that's been really cool to see, like Chomper Champs inspire other people to create things and, be able to access your creativity outside of being an SLP.
I think your business, I think a really cool step for it that could maybe happen one day is we see that kiddos respond way better when things are personalized to their interests. So there's a way where people can go to Chomper Champs and be like, I need the Spider-Man Chomper Champ. And you can leverage 3D printing to just crank it out. That could be like the coolest thing ever. And you could just have a Chomper Champ for like every client.
Yeah, that would be really cool. And Chomper Champs, 3D printing in general, but price for the most expensive part is like my time that goes into it, and also like the investment of getting a printer. But yeah, being able to like customize things, it's just crazy. Like I use my 3D printer I'm on it all day, every day, changing it out. And like the idea that you can have an idea 1 minute and then a physical object literally hours later, crazy, revolutionary, like no other point in human history. I don't think that 3D printing gets enough credibility for like really the marvel of engineering that it is, that anybody can access. A little SLP like me can get it. So I encourage anybody who's interested in it to, one, you can always reach out to me. I would love to help you. And local libraries also have 3D printing labs a lot of the time. My library has helped me a lot. It's super accessible.
Nice. And then just tell me about a success story or two of using Chomper Champs, maybe just like a specific case and what that looked like.
Yeah, I think that some of my favorite ways to use Chomper Champs is, one, I'll have like all this fun stuff out in the speech room. Like I'll have like games and, toys out, and like kids will come in and they'll be like, can we play with the puppy today? When I don't even have it out. That's what they call it, the puppy. And I'm like, heck yeah, which was always fun to see. But I think some of the most like rewarding clients that I would use it with would be my really young, oftentimes Gestalt language processors. They're really young, typically on the spectrum, and nothing spikes their interest. I mean, I shouldn't say that. They just have a very specific interest inventory. So a lot of the times you present traditional toys to these kids, but they're not neurotypical. So of course they're not going to be interested in these neurotypical toys. But there's something about Chomper Champs with like putting the item in, it falls down, you can't see it. I designed it so kids don't understand it's two separate parts, and so they can't take it apart themselves. And like these kids who are not interested in hardly anything I show them, a lot of the time they like Chomper Champ, and I can match that with something they do like. Like if they like the alphabet, like heck yeah, let's do the alphabet, 20 times during the session, and we can feed the alphabet letters to Chomper Champs, and it just gives an opportunity to add in more language, more opportunity to expand interest. It's just, I think that that's some of my favorite ways to use Chomper Champs, or with my little guys that can be challenging to plan for. And sometimes they come in and they want nothing to do with it. And I'm like, that's cool. We'll do what you want to do.
Do you find that most of your sessions with the younger kids are a little bit more reactive than planned like that? Do you kind of just feel out their vibe before you really commit to something?
Yeah, absolutely. All intervention should be, especially for children who are neurodivergent, but anybody below 4, like you really want to do child-led therapy, because if there's buy-in from the child, then the outcomes are going to be a lot easier. I mean, strapping a kid in a chair at the table at 3 years old and being like, we're going to say the sound 100 times, like that just is not effective. So having tools and resources that are play-based, fun, you can kind of disguise the work you need to get done with a play-based approach.
And then I kind of want to segue to something that we talked about a bit before in the conversation. We talked about how the school can get you so far, but there's only so many people. So it may be helpful to get help from outside, maybe a speech language pathologist. How do you think educators in the school, as well as clinicians, can collaborate to support a child's journey towards meeting their or their family's communication goals? And then maybe you could work in like Chomper Champs, and if you see any role that Chomper Champs would play in that collaboration.
Yeah, totally. I think that the number one thing, like when you have a child who's receiving services or has an IEP in the schools, like I always email or try to call the school SLP so that we can get on the same page. Sometimes, somebody's interpretation of something is a lot different than maybe like the reality of it, whether that's like me as the SLP, the parent's interpretation of information they've been provided, or the school's interpretation of information. So I think that just like making sure that you're engaging in like a communication cycle regularly is really important for the continuity of care. So I always recommend that. And then for Chomper Champs, I mean, kind of like anything that a child is interested in and that motivates them, I think that we should be sharing with each other. So again, in those conversations with the SLPs, if the child responds really well to a session with Chomper Champs, I think letting them know like, hey, I'm taking this approach. These are the tools I've used in that session to get these results. Anything I can do to support your goals and anything that they can do to support my goals is just going to better support the client. Sometimes we can get into like professional, like turf issues of, certain professionals staying in their lane. The vast majority of professionals I've worked with, that has not been the case, but you do run into that. And I think that the best thing we can do to serve our patients is at least try to collaborate. Yeah, so I feel pretty passionate about that, actually, trying to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, I think in some ways, by deciding to seek out the help of an SLP, you seek out advocacy for your child in the school system, which
Yes.
is a pretty invaluable thing and can be really worth it.
Absolutely. And a lot of the time, SLPs are the first line of services a family has ever come across, because it's like, oh, my child isn't talking as much as, their peers, and doctors or schools are like, oh, well, let's do some speech therapy. And so SLPs are in this kind of unique spot to lay the foundation of what your child's services are going to look like, possibly for years and years to come, depending on what your child has going on. So I think, like you said, advocacy, SLPs really supporting communication from the very beginning to set the precedent with the parent that you should expect these things from the professionals you're working with. You should not be ignored. Your emails and phone calls should not be ignored. You have a lot of rights that people just don't know what their rights are and what quality services look like.
At Verse, one of the things that we try to do is have a more limited caseload where we are assigning less folks to a given SLP so that they can provide more focus to each of their clients. Because we think that a lot of the reasons clients kind of suffer is because the SLPs are spread across so many different responsibilities. In a lot of places, you only have one SLP. They only studied for a subset of the field because it's so broad. And they have to see all these different types of clients, which can contribute to burnout because they're seeing folks that they didn't necessarily train to be able to see especially hard. So for us, we just try to have a lot of different folks that have different specialties, seeing a smaller cohort of people that are really specific to them. But yeah, I'll get done talking my book, and I just want to turn it back to you, Stephanie, about getting in touch. So how can the listeners of this learn more about Chomper Champs, access your tools, or get in touch with you for services or just to collaborate?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can find me at versttherapy.com. I'm in the directory, and you are welcome to book an intake call with me there if you have any questions or concerns about your child's reading abilities. If you want to connect with me outside of Verse, you can follow me on Instagram. It's chomper_champs_speech therapy, where I post Chomper Champs activities and about my product and 3D printing tips and tricks. But yeah, I would love to collaborate with anybody who has any questions about reading. I'd love to share information with other SLPs about resources, free resources that exist to get trained to be able to provide literacy intervention. But those are the main ways to get a hold of me.
Nice. Steph, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for everything that you do. And we can wrap this thing up. So again, appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, Adam.